The room was buzzing a low, happy hum of voices, the clinking of glasses, the soft laughter from every corner. It was a beautiful hotel ballroom. All warm lighting and polished floors, everyone was here. His entire team from the office all dressed up, and smiling, our friends from the neighborhood, the ones we've had barbecues with for 20 years. And our children beaming with pride for their father. This was it, the culmination of 35 years of him, working late, of me managing the house, of us building this life together side by side. I stood near the front, my heart so full it felt like it might burst. I looked at him, standing by the podium, laughing with his boss, my husband, the man I'd shared a bed with for decades. This party felt like a monument to us, to our partnership. It was all so perfect. This was a declaration. And then he said my name, Clara. He said it so softly, but the microphone carried it to every corner of the room. And to Clara, he continued, who came back into my life at just the right time, the love of my life, truly my rock. The words hung in the air for a second, suspended, then the silence crashed down. It was a physical thing, a weight pressing on my chest. You could hear a pin drop. And then you could feel it, every single pair of eyes in that room, turning, searching, finding me. I felt my face burn, my blood was roaring in my ears, so loud it almost drowned out the silence. But one set of eyes cut through everything else. Margaret's, his wife of 35 years. She was sitting right beside him. I saw her posture go rigid. I saw the color drain from her face. She didn't look at him. She just stared at me. Her expression wasn't even one of anger, not at first. It was pure, unadulterated shock, a dawning horror. And in that moment, I felt a wave of shame, so profound I thought I might be sick. I wanted to stand up, to run out of the room, to shout that it wasn't what it sounded like, but I was frozen, paralyzed by his reckless public betrayal. He had called me the love of his life in front of his wife, his children, his colleagues. He had thrown a bomb into the center of my quiet existence, and I was left standing in the crater. Our history isn't some sordid affair, it's so much more complicated than that, and so much sadder. Robert and I knew each other long before Margaret. We were kids together. We grew up on the same street. He was my first love, my first real heartbreak. His family moved away the summer we were 17. It was a different time, no internet, just letters that slowly stopped coming. We lost touch for decades. We found each other again 5 years ago, purely by chance at a museum fundraiser. The moment I saw him, it was like no time had passed at all. We fell into conversation so easily. We started meeting for coffee, just as friends would talk for hours about our lives, our failed marriages. I'd been divorced for 10 years, by thinner regrets. He told me things I don't think he'd ever told anyone. He confessed that he felt trapped, that he loved Margaret, of course he did, but it was a comfortable, quiet love. He said he felt like he'd been playing a part for most of his adult life, the reliable husband, the good provider. But with me, he said he could just be himself, the dreamer he was when we were 16. I never pushed for more. I was content with what we had. It felt special, sacred. Even we had a pact. We agreed that what we shared was ours alone, that bringing it into the light would ruin it. And worse, it would needlessly hurt people. It was a delicate, precious thing. This secret friendship, we were careful. We never met at each other's homes. Our phones were our own private channel. He was the most important person in my life, and I thought I was in his. But it was a life lived in the shadows. I understood that. I accepted it, or I thought I did, until he decided to drag us both into the blinding light of his retirement party. The fallout was immediate and brutal. The party ended in a kind of stunned quiet. People hurried away, without saying goodbye, avoiding my eyes. I drove home in a complete daze, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. My phone started buzzing. As soon as I walked in the door, messages from mutual acquaintances, their tones, a mix of morbid curiosity and thinly veiled judgment. I turned it off. I felt like a criminal. The sounds of the room became muffled, like I was submerged in water. I could see people's mouths moving, but I couldn't hear the words. The clinking of glasses was a distant metallic echo. A cold numbness started in my fingertips and began to spread up my arms, a chilling wave, moving toward my heart. Humiliation washed over me, first a hot prickling sensation across my skin. Everyone in this room knew, our friends, our children, his colleagues. They had all heard it. They had all seen my face in that moment of. The guilt was the worst part. It wasn't the guilt of an affair, because there was no affair, not a physical one, but the guilt of complicity. I had allowed this secret world to exist. I had been a willing participant in a deception that, while not sexual, was a profound betrayal nonetheless. I looked at my life, my quiet, independent life, and I saw how I had built it around this hidden relationship, and I felt sick with the knowledge that Margaret's entire reality had just been shattered. My feelings for her were a tangled mess. There was pity, of course, a deep aching sympathy for the humiliation she must have felt, but there was also a terrible, shameful flicker of something else, a feeling I am not proud of. When he called me the love of his life, a part of me, a small hidden part, felt a thrill after all those years in the shadows to be acknowledged, to be named. It was immediately crushed by guilt. But it was there, and that's what made it all so ugly. My anger at Robert, however, was pure and blazing. How dare he break our pact for the sake of a dramatic speech? How dare he use me as a prop in his late-life crisis, to paint himself as some romantic hero? Without any thought for the consequences, he didn't just disrupt his family, he blew up my life, too. He made me the other woman in a story I never agreed to star in. A few days later, I called him. His voice was ragged on the phone. He started trying to explain, to apologize. But I cut him off. I told him he was a coward, that his grand gesture wasn't romantic, it was selfish. It was about him wanting to feel authentic, without having the courage to actually live an authentic life. He had years to have a difficult conversation with his wife, to end his marriage, if that's what he truly wanted. Instead, he chose a public spectacle that left everyone wounded. I told him our friendship, the thing I had cherished most, was over, that he had poisoned it beyond repair. He cried. I hung up. But it didn't feel like enough. The silence in my own house was deafening. I couldn't stop thinking about Margaret. I imagined her in that big quiet house with him, the air thick with things unsaid. I felt an overwhelming need to face her, not to explain myself, not to justify what happened, but simply to acknowledge her pain, to look her in the eye, and say I was sorry for the part I played. I found her address. I drove there one afternoon, my heart pounding the whole way. I sat in my car outside their house for what felt like an hour, just watching the front door. I didn't know what I would say, I just knew I had to try. I walked up the path and rang the bell. She answered. She looked older, tired, her eyes were redrimmed. She didn't look surprised to see me. She didn't invite me in. We stood on the porch. I said, Margaret, I am so sorry for everything. She just looked at me, her expression unreadable. I told her that what Robert said was a cruel and distorted version of the truth, that we were old friends, who had shared a close friendship, but that it was wrong to keep it a secret. I told her that I never intended for any of this to happen, that I never wanted to cause her pain. She was quiet for a long time, then she said, he told me it was just friendship. He swears nothing physical ever happened. I confirmed it. I told her that was the truth. She nodded slowly, looking out at the street. It doesn't really matter though, does it? She said, the secrecy is the affair, the emotional part is the betrayal, the rest is just details. And I knew she was right. There was nothing more I could say. I apologized again and turned to leave. As I was walking away, she spoke one last time. Her voice was flat. He's lost you both now, you know. I got in my car and drove away. I didn't look back. Impact, then came the anger, a sharp burning spike right behind my eyes. But stronger than both was the confusion, a deep, profound, world-shattering confusion. How long our life, was it all a lie? The vacations, the holidays, the quiet evenings watching television, was any of it real? There's no clean resolution to this. Margaret and Robert are still together as far as I know, trying to piece their life back together. I doubt they ever will. Not really. The trust is gone. I've moved to a different town. I needed a clean break. I've thought a lot about love and loyalty. I thought I was being loyal to Robert by keeping our secret. But true loyalty can't exist in the dark. It has to be able to withstand the light. Our connection, the one I thought was so special, was built on a foundation of omission. It was fragile because it was false. The unintended consequence of his words that night wasn't just the destruction of his marriage and my peace, it was the revelation of a hard truth I'd been avoiding. I had settled for a fraction of a man. I had accepted a love that needed to be hidden. And in doing so, I had diminished myself. He called me the love of his life. But the real love of my life, I see now, should have been my own freedom, my own integrity. I lost sight of that. And that is a lesson I will carry with me forever. It was the kind of party you see in movies, the big retirement send-off, held in a grand hotel ballroom with polished floors that reflected the light from 1,000 tiny crystals in the chandeliers. I remember smoothing down the front of my new dress, a deep emerald green that made me feel elegant, sophisticated. For 40 years I'd watched him build his career. And tonight was our night to celebrate it all together. The air was thick with the scent of fancy perfume and anticipation. I stood near the front. So proud I thought my heart might just burst. All our friends, our children, even a few of his old colleagues had flown in. It was perfect. Then they called him up to give his speech. He climbed the little steps to the podium looking a bit sheepish in his suit, the same way he had on our wedding day. He cleared his throat, tapped the microphone, and gave that lopsided grin I've loved for decades. He thanked his partners. He thanked his team. He told a funny story about his first day on the job, getting completely lost in the mailroom. The crowd was eating it up. He was warm, gracious, everything I knew he could be. And then he got to the part about me. He looked right at me, his eyes soft. And to my wonderful wife Sarah, he began, and I felt a blush rise to my cheeks. Thank you for your patience, for your support, for putting up with all those late nights. It was lovely. It was exactly what I wanted to hear. But he wasn't finished. He took a deep breath, looked out at the crowd, and said, all of you, everyone here has meant so much to me. But now I want to talk about the real rock in my life. The one constant through all the stress, all the triumphs. He paused for dramatic effect. And I leaned forward, my smile fixed in place, ready for my real moment in the sun. And now, he said, his voice dropping to a sincere, heartfelt tone that made the room go absolutely silent, to the love of my life. My heart did a little flutter. This was it, the grand finale, the proclamation of our enduring love, in front of everyone we knew. He said the name Daisy. I felt a hand on my arm. It was my daughter. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with shock and horror. Mom, she whispered. But I couldn't speak. I could only force my lips upward into the ghost of a smile, a social instinct. A desperate, pathetic attempt to pretend that everything was okay. I patted her hand, a meaningless gesture. I had to keep standing, I had to keep smiling. If I stopped, I would shatter into a million pieces, right there on the ballroom floor. The world didn't just stop, it shattered into a million sharp, glittering pieces. Daisy, the name hung in the air. A foreign, poisonous word. My name is Sarah. My mind started racing, a frantic, panic scramble through decades of memory. Who was Daisy? A client, a secretary from the old office. A neighbor? I scanned the crowd, my eyes darting from face to face, looking for a woman who would light up at the sound of that name. I saw only confusion, a sea of bewildered expressions, mirroring my own internal chaos. My husband. The man I'd shared a bed with for 40 years was publicly proclaiming his love for another woman named Daisy at his own retirement party. The humiliation was a physical wave, hot and sickening, washing over me. The elegant ballroom suddenly felt like a trap, the lights too bright, the faces too close. I couldn't breathe. The polite applause that had started uncertainly sounded like it was coming from the end of a long tunnel. I saw his lips moving, still talking, but I couldn't hear the words over the roaring in my ears. He was oblivious, just standing up there smiling, describing his love of my life, to a room full of our stunned friends and family. My body moved on autopilot. I had to get out. I turned, my smile still plastered on my face like a grotesque mask, and I started walking quickly towards the nearest exit, which happened to be a set of French doors leading to a terrace. I felt every eye on me, or maybe I just imagined it. But the weight of their pity was a heavy cloak on my shoulders. I pushed through the doors out into the cool night air, leaving the warmth and the noise and the unbelievable betrayal behind. I stood there on the dark terrace, gripping the cold stone railing, my knuckles white. I could still hear the muffled sound of his voice from inside. He was still going. How could he? What was he saying now? Her unwavering loyalty, maybe. She's always happy to see me. The tears started, hot and angry, mingling with utter disbelief. 40 years. It was all a lie. I felt like a fool, the last to know, standing there, in my expensive green dress, the star of my own personal tragedy. Suddenly the door burst open behind me. It was my sister, Carol. Her face flushed, her eyes wide. Sarah, oh my God, Sarah, wait. She gasped, rushing over to me. She was out of breath. But she was also laughing. It was a choked, hysterical kind of laugh. I stared at her, horrified. Was she laughing at me, at the situation? Carol, what is wrong with you? I hissed, my voice trembling. How can you laugh? He has a Daisy. He just announced it to the entire world. That sent her over the edge. She doubled over, clutching her stomach, tears of mirth now streaming down her face. No, no, Sarah, you don't understand, she wheezed, trying to catch her breath. What don't I understand? He said. Daisy. The love of his life is named Daisy. I was practically shouting now, my confusion tipping into anger. Yes, Carol finally managed to shriek, straightening up and grabbing my arms. But Sarah, think who is Daisy? The party tried to continue. The music started up again. Some bland, just standard people tried to talk. but their conversations were hushed and strained. I saw glances thrown my way, then quickly averted a sea of pity and morbid curiosity. I stood rooted to the spot, a statue of a happy wife. He worked the room again, shaking hands, accepting congratulations. He didn't come near me, not once. He didn't even look in my direction. The coward, he had dropped a bomb on my life, and then just walked away. I just stared at her blankly. My mind was a whirlwind of suspicion and hurt, unable to land on anything sensible. And then, like a slow sunrise, it dawned on me. It was a sharp realization. It was a creeping, absurd warmth that started in my toes and worked its way up the walks. Every morning and evening, rain or shine, the way he'd buy special treats from the butcher, the way he'd talk to her in a silly, high-pitched voice, when he thought no one was listening, the way her tail would thump against the floor, the moment he walked through the door. Daisy, our sweet, goofy, utterly devoted golden retriever Daisy, who had been his shadow for 15 years. Daisy, who was probably at home right now, sleeping on our bed waiting for him. The shift inside me was instantaneous and total. The crushing weight of betrayal vanished, replaced by a wave of such profound, ridiculous relief that my legs almost buckled. The humiliation transformed, melting into the purest, most hysterical laughter I have ever experienced. It burst out of me, a loud, unladylike roar that echoed in the quiet night. I leaned against Carol, and we both howled, tears of joy and absurdity now streaming down our faces. We were a mess, clinging to each other, laughing so hard we could barely breathe. We stumbled back inside, arm in arm, just as he was finishing his speech. And she's never once criticized my driving, he was saying to a room that was now largely in on the joke, chuckling warmly. He saw us come in, saw our tear-streaked, laughing faces, and his own smile faltered for a second, replaced by a look of confusion. He concluded, "So thank you, Daisy, for everything." He got a round of genuine, hearty applause and walked off the podium looking pleased. He came straight over to us, his brow furrowed. "Everything all right? I saw you run out. Was it something I said?" Carol just patted his arm, still giggling, and wandered off to find her husband, leaving the two of us alone. I looked at my husband, this wonderful, kind, slightly clueless man, and I started laughing all over again. "Oh, it was something you said. All right, I managed to get out the love of your life." His eyes went wide. Realization dawned on his face, slow and horrified. Oh no, Sarah, you didn't think I was talking about the dog, our dog." "I know," I laughed, pulling him into a hug. "I know that now. But for a minute there, I was ready to serve you with divorce papers and award Daisy the house." The rest of the party was the best part. The story spread like wildfire, and instead of a staid, formal retirement event, it turned into a night of laughter and storytelling. Everyone came up to us not to offer somber congratulations, but to laugh with us about the great Daisy. Misunderstanding, my husband kept shaking his head, equal parts embarrassed and amused. "I just meant, she's been a constant comfort," he'd say, and I'd elbow him gently. "Next time, maybe lead with my wife Sarah, and also the from the crater dog." We drove home together, still chuckling about it, and when we opened the front door, there she was, Daisy, her tail wagging her entire back end, stumbling over in a sleepy, happy daze to greet him. He got down on one knee, still in his fancy suit, and scratched behind her ears. "There she is," he cooed, "the love of my life. Did you miss me?" And I looked at them, this man and his dog, and I felt a love deeper than any dramatic proclamation could ever convey. The real love story wasn't in a mistaken identity. It was in the 40 years of shared life, in the loyalty of an old dog, and in the ability to laugh until you cried at the absurdity of it all. It was a reminder that the biggest dramas in life are often just silly misunderstandings waiting to be unraveled, and that true, unwavering love often comes with 4 paws and a wagging tail. The noise in that banquet hall was overwhelming, a sea of gray suits and polite laughter, all celebrating my husband's long career, 30 years at the same firm. I stood by his side. As I always had, my hand tucked in the crook of his arm, I was playing my part perfectly, the supportive wife, the proud partner. I smiled at his colleagues, nodded at their stories. I was a fixture in his life, a piece of the scenery. Then they called him up for his speech. The room erupted in applause. He stepped onto the small stage, his face flushed with pride, and maybe one too many glasses of champagne. He cleared his throat, tapped the microphone. He thanked his mentors, his team, his clients. He told a few jokes I'd heard 100 times before, and then he said the words that shattered my entire world. "And of course," he said, beaming out at the crowd, "I have to thank my beautiful wife Carol. Without her, well, Let's just say I never would have made it to all those early meetings, he chuckled. And the crowd chuckled with him, a warm, familiar sound. Then he paused, his eyes scanning the room. They landed on a woman, standing near the back, a young sharp-faced associate from his office. He smiled, a different kind of smile. But the person who truly deserves my gratitude, he continued, his voice softening in a way I hadn't heard. Years is Jessica. Jess, you've been my real rock these last few years, your dedication, your brilliant mind. You've been the secret to my success. This final chapter wouldn't have been half as rewarding without you by my side. The room got very quiet for a moment. Then a wave of awkward applause started up again. People glanced at me, then quickly looked away. I felt the heat rise to my face. It wasn't the words themselves. It was the look in his eyes, it was the intimacy in his tone, it was a public declaration. A tribute to another woman delivered right in front of me, in front of everyone who knew us. The illusion I had been maintaining, the fragile glass sculpture of our marriage, didn't just crack. It exploded into a million tiny glittering shards, and as those pieces fell around me, I saw my life for what it was, a performance, a life built on a foundation of sand. I had been living for him, my schedule, my interests, my very identity had been shaped around supporting his ambitions, and in return, he had given my role, my part in his story, to someone else. The initial pain was a physical blow, a cold knot in my stomach. But it lasted only for a second. Then it was washed away by something else, a pure, clean anger. It wasn't a hot, screaming rage. It was a cold fire, a focused energy. It was the most alive I had felt in 20 years. As he stood there basking in the uncomfortable applause, I made a decision: no more pretending, no more being the perfect wife in a deeply imperfect marriage. This humiliation wasn't my end, it was my beginning. The rest of the evening was a blur, a nightmare in slow motion. I have no idea how long we stayed. At some point, I must have gathered my purse. I must have said goodbye to people. I remember the cold night air hitting my face. As we walked out of the hotel, it was the first real sensation I'd felt. Since he said her name, the ride home was the most silent car ride of my life. The only sound was the hum of the engine, and the turn signal clicking, a monotonous rhythm marking the distance between my old life and the next morning. I woke up before dawn. The house was silent. He was still asleep, snoring lightly, oblivious. I went to the guest room, and I called a lawyer. My voice was steady. I didn't cry, I stated my intentions clearly. Then I started packing, not everything, just what I needed. I took my clothes, my books, the few pieces of jewelry that had been my mother's. I left behind the expensive gifts he'd given me over the years. They felt like props from a play I was no longer acting in. When he finally stumbled into the kitchen, bleary-eyed, I was sitting at the table with 2 cups of coffee. I told him I was leaving. I told him I'd already spoken to an attorney. The shock on his face was almost comical. He sputtered. He tried to backtrack, to say his speech was taken out of context, that I was overreacting. I just sipped my coffee. The anger was my shield. It kept the sadness at bay, it fueled me. The legal process was its own kind of education. I hired a fierce, no-nonsense lawyer who treated me like a CEO, not a victim. I learned about assets, about pensions, about things I had happily let him manage for decades. I took control. It was terrifying and exhilarating. I opened my own bank account. I bought a car, without asking for his opinion. Every signature I put on a document felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. With the practicalities in motion, I started looking inward. I had to remember who I was before I became his wife. It was like excavating a forgotten city. I found an old sketchbook at the bottom of a box. I used to love to draw, to paint watercolors. I hadn't touched a brush in 15 years. I went to an art supply store and bought a whole new set of paints, the good kind. I never let myself splurge on the smell of the turpentine, the feel of a new brush in my hand. It was like greeting an old friend. I also looked in the mirror. I saw a woman with a sensible easy-to-manage haircut and a wardrobe of beige and navy. I looked like I was dressed to be invisible. On a whim, I walked into a salon and told the stylist to do whatever she wanted. She cut it all off. It was shorter, sharper, with streaks of silver I'd been hiding for years. I looked striking. I looked my age, but with an authority I'd never had. Then I went shopping. I bought a crimson dress. I bought trousers that actually fit my body. Leather jacket. I stopped dressing to compliment him, to blend into the background at his corporate events. I started dressing for myself. The joy of putting on an outfit chosen purely for my own pleasure was a revelation. It seems like a small thing, but it wasn't. It was a declaration. Every decision became a source of power. What did I want to eat for dinner? I didn't have to consider his bland palate. I cooked spicy food, I ordered strange takeout. I went to the movies alone, and saw the foreign films he always groaned at. I left the toilet seat up, if I felt like it. I played my music loud, the folk music and classical. He hated the silence in my new apartment. Was my silence, it was peaceful, not lonely. Once the divorce was finalized, a new kind of energy opened up. It was time to build, not just reclaim. I had always wanted to travel. But he never had the time, and the idea of going alone seemed daunting now. It seemed like the most natural thing in the world. I booked a trip to Italy by myself. I wandered through Roman ruins and got lost in Venetian canals. I ate gelato for breakfast and talked to strangers in cafes. There was no one to complain, no schedule to keep. I was entirely, utterly free. Whatever was coming next, I stared out the window at the passing streetlights. They streaked by blurry lines of light against the dark. He didn't say a word. He just drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. That trip gave me the courage for the biggest step. I had always had an idea for a business, a small gallery, featuring local artists. I'd mentioned it to him once years ago, and he patted my hand and said, "That's a nice hobby, dear, but running a business is a lot of headaches." I let the dream go. Now I resurrected it. I used part of my settlement as seed money. I found a small, sunny storefront. I met with artists. I learned about profit margins. I built a website. It was terrifying. There were setbacks, but every problem was my problem to solve, and with each solution my confidence grew. The gallery opened last spring. It's not a huge success yet, but it's breaking. Even more importantly, it's mine. My social circle changed too. I let go of the couple of friends, the ones whose loyalty was really to him, or to the idea of us. As a couple, I reconnected with my college friends, the women who knew me when I was wild and ambitious. I built a new support system of people who cheered for me for my successes. Alone, their friendship felt truer, stronger. About a year after the divorce, a friend convinced me to try dating. The thought sent a chill through me. The last time I'd been on a date, cassette tapes were still a thing. But I agreed. The first few dates were awkward. Men my age seemed to want a nurse or a purse. But I learned to spot the red flags immediately. I learned to walk away from anyone who didn't treat me with genuine respect. I wasn't desperate for companionship, I was curious. And then I met David. He's a writer. He's quiet, thoughtful. He asks me questions about my gallery and actually listens to the answers. He isn't threatened by my independence. He admires it. It's a partnership of equals. It's nothing like my marriage. Now when I look back at that retirement party, I feel something I never thought I would. Gratitude. The pain was real, and the humiliation was searing. But it was the catalyst I needed. It was the shock that jolted me awake. That moment was the end of a story, the story of Carol, the supportive wife. But it was the brilliant beginning of my story. If I could talk to other women living in that quiet, comfortable illusion, I would tell them this: your value is not defined by your partner's actions. Your dreams are not hobbies to be patted on the head. The life you've built for someone else can be dismantled, and you can build a better one for yourself. It's terrifying, but on the other side of that fear is a strength you never knew you possessed. The most important relationship you will ever have is the one you have with yourself. I had to lose a husband to find the love of my own life, and I can say with complete honesty that I am now the love of my own life, and that is more than enough. It is everything. JSON parse or network error, expecting value line 213 column, 1 char 1166. The human mind is a complex place, and even the most shocking actions rarely come from nowhere. They are often the final visible tremor from a fault line that has been growing deep underground for years. What we witnessed at that retirement party was one of those tremors. To understand it, we have to look past the initial shock and start deconstructing the event itself. And in that silence, the final terrible realization settled over me. This was deliberate. This was calculated. He didn't stumble over his words. He didn't correct himself. He meant to say it. He wanted to say it. He wanted to thank her in front of everyone. And in doing so, he erased me. He ended our marriage, not with a conversation, not with a fight, but with a public announcement. He didn't have the decency to tell me in private. He chose to humiliate me, to make me a spectator to the. First, consider the setting. A retirement party is far more than just a celebration in psychological terms. It's a major life transition, a rite of passage that forces a profound reevaluation of identity. For decades, a large part of this man's sense of self was tied to his career, to his role as a provider. Suddenly, that structure is being removed. The party itself is a potent stressor, a public acknowledgement of this massive change. All eyes are on him, celebrating an identity he is about to lose. This can create a state of high anxiety and vulnerability, a feeling of being unmoored. It's a pressure cooker environment, and for someone with unresolved issues, the lid can blow. Then we have the profoundly public nature of his revelation. Why then it wasn't a private confession over the kitchen table. This was a performance. He chose a stage with an audience of colleagues, friends, and family. We have to ask, who was the real audience for this speech? Was it for his wife, a brutal act of confrontation? Was it for the other woman, a grand dramatic gesture to prove his devotion? Or was it perhaps most compellingly for himself? This is where the concept of costly signaling becomes relevant in relationships. We sometimes make statements that are so dramatic, so damaging, that they cannot be taken back or ignored. It's a way of making a new reality concrete. By burning the bridge so publicly, he may have been trying to force a change he felt incapable of making through quieter, more honest means. He was creating a point of no return, ensuring that the fragile facade of his marriage could not simply be patched up and carried on as before. Now let's analyze the speech itself, the wording, the timing. If the words were calculated and cruel, that points to one set of motivations. If they were emotional, almost incoherent, that points to another. The fact that he named another woman, a first love, suggests this wasn't a spontaneous comment about unhappiness. This was a specific loaded piece of personal history, brought into the present. The timing at the peak of a celebration in his honor indicates a need to seize control of the narrative of his own life. As everyone celebrated his career, he may have felt an overwhelming urge to say no. This isn't the whole story. The most important part of my story is something you know nothing about. Moving from the event to the man, we have to explore a spectrum of possible motivations. Human behavior is rarely monocausal, but we can examine different psychological lenses. The first is the hypothesis of deliberate cruelty. This view suggests elements of narcissistic injury. Perhaps he felt his wife had not appreciated him sufficiently over the years. Maybe he perceived slights or a lack of attention. The retirement party, an event meant to honor him, could have felt like too little too late. The public humiliation of his wife then becomes a form of punishment. It's an act of rage, a way to make her feel the depth of his unhappiness by inflicting a matching pain. It's a destructive and vengeful impulse rooted in a deep-seated sense of entitlement and a bruised ego. A second, more sympathetic, but no less devastating theory is the existential crisis. Retirement forces a confrontation with mortality and meaning. When he looked back on his life, he may have been consumed by a sense of inauthenticity. The narrative of his lithe, dependable husband, the loyal employee, may have felt like a lie. The confession about a first love could have been a desperate, reckless attempt to reclaim a narrative of passion and lost chances. It was a way of saying the real me is not this retired man. Destruction of my own life. You see before you the real me is the young man who loved someone else, and I need you to know that before I die, this is less about punishing his wife and more about a frantic search for a coherent self in the face of life's final chapters. Then there's the unresolved grief angle. The mention of a first love is key here. This may have been a loss he never properly processed. He packed away that pain decades ago, buried it under work and family responsibilities. But major life transitions have a way of unearthing buried emotions. The retirement party, with its theme of looking back, may have brought that long-repressed grief to the surface with uncontrollable force. It wasn't a calculated speech. It was an emotional eruption. The pain of that old loss might have felt more real to him in that moment than the reality of his current life. The confession was a symptom of a festering wound that finally broke open. A less likely but still possible angle is cognitive decline. While we assume the speech was coherent, if there were signs of confusion or impaired judgment, it could point to early neurological issues. However, the specific nature of the confession makes this a weaker explanation. It's usually more plausible that such a targeted revelation comes from a place of psychological conflict rather than pure neurological deficit. Now we must turn our attention to the impact, because the psychological fallout from an event like this is immense and complex. For the wife, this is not just a betrayal, it is a profound psychological trauma. The public nature of the humiliation attacks the very core of her self-esteem and identity. Her entire life narrative, the shared history of her marriage, has been publicly invalidated in a single moment. She may experience intense shame, as if she herself has been exposed as a fool the ground beneath. Her feet has vanished. This can lead to a crisis of reality, known as gaslighting, especially if the husband later attempts to downplay the event. He might say you're overreacting, or it was the wine talking, or I didn't mean it like that. This forces the wife to question her own perception of the event. Was it really as bad as she remembers? This erodes her trust in her own mind, compounding the trauma and creating a deep sense of isolation. We also have to consider the family system. A family operates as an interconnected unit, a homeostasis. This secret, and its explosive revelation, is like a boulder thrown into a still pond. The ripples disrupt everyone. Children may feel their own sense of family history is a lie. Alliances shift. The entire system is thrown into chaos, as every member struggles to reorient themselves around this new painful truth. The stability they relied on is gone. In severe cases, the wife may even experience symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. She might have flashbacks to the party nightmares, hypervigilance, and a pervasive sense of anxiety. A place that was supposed to be safer social circle, her home, has become a source of danger and humiliation. The psychological wounds are deep and require careful professional attention. So what are the pathways forward? The first and most crucial step is therapeutic intervention. The wife needs individual therapy to process the trauma, rebuild her shattered self-esteem, and establish a firm grip on her reality. She needs a safe space to articulate her pain, without being questioned or minimized. For the husband, if he possesses any insight, individual therapy is essential to understand the motivations behind his actions, whether they were cruel, desperate, or born from unresolved pain. He finally stepped up to the microphone. The room quieted, all eyes turning to him. He had that same charming, slightly shy smile he always gets when he's the center of attention. He cleared his throat. He started exactly as I thought he would. He thanked his colleagues, calling a few by name, telling a short, funny story about his early days. He thanked his mentors, the men who had guided him. He spoke about the late nights and the big projects. I nodded along, my smile fixed in place, so proud of the man he was. The questions started, then swirling in the silence. Who's she really? How long has this been going on? A year, 5 years, 10? Were there trips I thought were for work actually with her? Were the late nights at the office spent in her arms? Did our friends know? Does anyone know? The foundations of my entire reality? Every memory I had of the last decade began to crack and crumble. I looked at the profile of the man I had loved for most of my adult life, and I didn't recognize him. I was sitting in a car with. Whether couples therapy is possible is a separate and very difficult question. It would require the husband to take full, unequivocal responsibility for the damage he has caused without excuses. It would require a willingness to sit in the immense discomfort of his wife's justified rage and grief. Reconciliation is a long road, and it may not be the healthiest outcome. Sometimes the damage is too profound. Beyond therapy, the wife must focus on establishing strong boundaries. This means deciding what level of contact, if any, she can have with her husband. While she heals, it means leaning heavily on her support system, trusted friends, family members who validate her experience. She must prioritize her own psychological safety above all else. The broader lesson here for all of us is about the danger of unresolved issues in long-term relationships. When we avoid difficult conversations, when we bury resentments or grief, we are not making them disappear, we are building up pressure. This case is an extreme example, but it highlights a universal truth: authentic communication, however hard, is the only way to prevent a slow erosion of trust or a catastrophic collapse. In the end, there is no single simple answer to the question, why would a man do this? It was likely a toxic cocktail of factors: the stress of a life transition, a long-standing sense of dissatisfaction, a nugget of unresolved grief, and a tragic, flawed decision to seek resolution through a grand destructive act. It reminds us that behind the shocking headline of a public betrayal lies a much longer, quieter, and more complicated story of a human psyche in distress. Understanding that complexity isn't about making excuses, it's about comprehending the depths from which such pain can emerge. A stranger who had just torn my world apart with a single sentence, and the only thing louder than the engine was the screaming question in my head: what happens now? The room was buzzing. It was a warm, golden kind of noise, filled with the clinking of glasses and the low hum of so many conversations woven together. Everyone was here, His colleagues from the office, our old friends from the neighborhood, our children with their own families, all of them had come to celebrate him to honor a lifetime of work. I stood near the buffet table. Just watching it all I felt this deep settled pride. This wasn't just his party, it was our party. It was the celebration of the life we had. Built brick by brick, year by year, all the late nights, the sacrifices, the shared jokes over coffee in the morning, it all felt like it was culminating in this perfect shining moment. He was beaming, shaking hands, accepting backslaps. And every time he caught my eye from across the room he'd give me this little wink, this secret signal that said we did this. Then someone tapped a microphone, a hush started to fall over the crowd, a wave of anticipation. He was nudged toward the front of the room, he took the microphone. And his smile was so familiar, so warm. He looked out at all our friends, our family. He started to speak, his voice steady and full of that easy charm I'd fallen in love with decades ago. He thanked his boss, he told a funny story about his first day on the job. He thanked his team, calling a few of them out by name, getting a laugh with an inside joke. It was all so perfectly normal, so right. I felt my heart swell. This was the man I loved, this was our story. But then his tone shifted, it was subtle. He paused, and the pause went on a beat too long. He looked down at his hands, then out into the crowd. But his gaze, it swept over my section. It didn't land on me, it was like he was searching for something or someone else. A little frown creased my brow. What was he doing? He cleared his throat. The room was quiet now, utterly still. And well, he said, his voice softening in a way that felt strangely intimate, completely out of place in this crowded room. There's one more thank you I have to give, the most important one. My breath caught. This was it. This was the moment he would turn to me, his partner of 40 years, the mother of his children, his rock. I could feel the smiles of our friends turning toward me. I prepared myself for the blush, for the happy tears. He took a deep breath. I have to thank the true love of my life. My smile was already forming. I was ready to meet his eyes. Life we had made, it was a beautiful speech. But he said a name. It wasn't my name. The sound that came out of his mouth was a woman's name I had never heard before, a name that meant nothing to me, a name that hung in the air, sharp and alien and utterly devastatingly wrong. For a second my brain refused to process it. It was like he'd spoken in a foreign language. I actually glanced around thinking maybe I'd misheard, or that he was referring to some childhood sweetheart in a joke. But the silence in the room was different now. It wasn't anticipatory anymore, it was thick with shock. I saw faces freeze. I saw our daughter's hand fly to her mouth. I saw our best friend Mark stare at the floor, his shoulders slumped. And then I saw her across the room, a woman with blonde hair, standing near the back. She had her head bowed slightly, a faint private smile on her lips. And in that instant, I knew that was her, the true love of his life. This stranger standing in a room full of our life, being acknowledged with a tenderness he hadn't shown me in years. The floor seemed to tilt. The warm golden light of the party suddenly felt harsh and clinical, like the lights in a hospital. The buzz of conversation, which had started up again in a nervous, fractured way, became muffled and distant, as if I were at the bottom of a deep, cold well. I could hear the thud of my own heart, a loud, panicked drumbeat in my ears. I felt a cold numbness start in my fingertips and creep up my arms, a sensation of ice water moving through my veins. My face felt hot, though burning. Humiliation, so profound it was a physical pain. I could feel every single pair of eyes in the room on me, even the ones that were desperately trying not to look. My mind was a frantic scramble. Who is she? A coworker? A friend? How long? Days, weeks, years? The questions were like shards of glass tumbling over each other. Every business trip he'd taken, every late night at the office, every time he'd been distracted and distant, every single moment of our recent life was suddenly cast in this new hideous light. It wasn't stress, it wasn't just getting older, it was this, it was her. Our entire marriage, the entire foundation of my life, was revealed to be a carefully constructed lie. I was living in a house I thought was built on rock, and with one sentence he had shown me, it was built on sand, and the tide was coming in. I realized my face was still arranged in something resembling a smile. It was a grotesque frozen mask. My social training, 40 years of being a gracious hostess, of smoothing things over, had kicked in automatically. Don't make a scene, be polite, smile. So I stood there smiling like an idiot, while my heart shattered into a million pieces inside my chest. I couldn't move, I couldn't speak. I just stood there, a monument to my own obliviousness, a public exhibit of a wife who didn't know her husband had a whole other Then he paused a long, deliberate pause. He looked out over the crowd. But his eyes seemed to slide right past me like I was a ghost. His expression softened in a way I hadn't seen in years. A very specific intimate softness. My smile faltered for just a second, a tiny crack in the facade. He took a breath. And now, he said, his voice, dropping into a more serious, heartfelt tone, I have to thank the true love of my life. Life. The party didn't end immediately. It just decayed. People started leaving quickly with mumbled excuses about babysitters and early mornings. Their goodbyes were strained, their hugs stiff and awkward. They couldn't get away from me fast enough. I saw the pity in their eyes. And the pity was almost worse than the shock. He mingled for a bit. But people were avoiding him too. He finally came over to me, his face unreadable. We should probably go. He said, his voice flat. I just nodded. I couldn't look at him. The car ride home was the most silent hour of my life. The only sound was the hum of the engine, and the occasional swish of a passing car. He stared straight ahead at the road. I stared out the side window at the blur of streetlights. The space between us in that car was vast. It was filled with every unspoken truth, every betrayed secret, every lie he had ever told. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rake my nails down his face. I wanted to demand answers. But the words wouldn't come. The shock had sealed my throat shut. What would be the point of asking? The truth was already out. It was worse than any question I could have possibly imagined. We pulled into the garage. The door rattled shut behind us, closing us in. The silence in the dark car was absolute. He turned off the engine. And in that final quiet click, the last pretense fell away. There was no party noise to hide behind anymore, no audience to perform, for it was just us, and the crushing weight of what he had done. This wasn't a slip of the tongue, it wasn't a joke that landed wrong. The calmness in his voice, when he said it the deliberate way, he avoided my eyes. The fact that she was there, he meant to say it, he wanted to say it, he wanted her to hear it. And he didn't care if I heard it too. This was a declaration. It was an act of brutal public annihilation. He had thanked the love of his life at his retirement party. And it wasn't me, and that single calculated act didn't just ruin a party, it unraveled our entire past and obliterated any possible future. The question was no longer why, the question was, who is this man sitting next to me? And who is the woman I've been married to for 40 years, if I wasn't the love of his life? The room was so loud, a sea of gray suits and colorful dresses, all laughing, clinking glasses, 40 years of his career, all wrapped up in this hotel ballroom. The air smelled like roasted chicken and perfume. I stood near the head table, smiling, accepting congratulations, as if I'd earned them myself. And in a way, I suppose, I'd been the one keeping the home running, remembering the birthdays. He forgot making sure his suits were always pressed. This party felt like my retirement too. He was at the podium, his face flushed with wine and pride. His speech was everything you'd expect, thanking colleagues, telling a few harmless, funny stories. He was always so good at that, charming. Then he got quiet. He said he wanted to thank one more person, someone very special. I straightened up, ready for the nod, the acknowledgement of the wife who stood by him, but he didn't look at me. He looked out over the crowd, his eyes a little unfocused, like he was seeing a different room entirely. He said, and I have to thank, well, the one who got away, the real love of my life, if I am being perfectly honest. She knows who she is. There was an awkward chuckle from the audience. A few people glanced at me, then quickly looked away. He just smiled, this sad, distant smile, and raised his glass to what might have been. My breath caught. This was it. This was the moment. I straightened my dress, ready for the look he'd give me, the smile we'd share. But his eyes were fixed on a point somewhere to my left. He continued, his voice, clear and strong, carrying through the silent room, the person who has been my rock, my inspiration, my everything through all of it. The noise of the party rushed back in, but it was muffled, like I had cotton in my ears. I could see people's mouths moving, but I couldn't hear the words, the love of his life, the one who got away. He said it so casually, like he was commenting on the weather, like he hadn't just taken a sledgehammer to the foundation of our 40-year marriage. My face felt hot. I had to keep smiling. I had to be gracious. So I did. I lifted my own glass, my hand remarkably steady, and I drank to the ghost he had just invited to our table. That night after we got home, the house was dead quiet. He was already heading upstairs, humming to himself, oblivious. I stopped him in the hallway. The question was simple. Who were you talking about? He looked confused for a second, then waved a hand. Oh, that it was nothing, just a bit of sentimental nonsense. For the crowd, he tried to kiss my forehead. But I moved away. It didn't sound like nothing, it sounded very specific. His face closed off. That was a look I knew well. The shutters coming down. It's late. Margaret, let's not do this. And he walked up the stairs, leaving me standing there in the dark hall. That was the moment my search began. Shock turned into something harder, more determined. I wasn't just hurt, I was a detective now. And my first case was the life I thought I'd lived. The next morning I started with the obvious places. The attic. He was a hoarder of memories. But only the ones he wanted to keep. Boxes and boxes of tax returns, old manuals, for appliances we hadn't owned in 30 years. But the personal stuff, our wedding album, was on the shelf downstairs, dusted regularly. But what about the stuff before me? I found a cardboard box, tucked behind the Christmas decorations. It was labeled misc papers. Inside, under a stack of old college textbooks, was a manila envelope. It felt light. I opened it, and there she was. A black and white photograph curled at the edges. A young woman with dark hair laughing, leaning against a tree. She couldn't have been more than 20 on the back, and his familiar slanted handwriting was a date 1965. And a name, Eliza. 1965. That was 2 years before we met. I sat back on my heels, the photograph in my hand. Eliza. The name meant nothing to me. He had never in 4 to 3 years mentioned an Eliza. I confronted him with it. I laid the photograph on the kitchen table while he was drinking his coffee. Who is she? He looked at it. And for a fraction of a second, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, not guilt, something softer, sadness. Then, it was gone. An old friend from college, a long time ago. His voice was flat, the one from the speech I pressed. He sighed, the long-suffering sigh he used when I was being unreasonable. No, Margaret. That was just a figure of speech. This is different. It's ancient history. He took the photograph and put it in his pocket. Let it go. But you don't tell a detective to let it go, you just make them dig deeper. I started online. It was clumsy at first. I typed Eliza and the name of his college and 1965 into a search engine. Nothing. Then I found a digital yearbook from his university. I scrolled through the scanned pages, my eyes straining, and I found her. Eliza Winters. She was in the drama club. There was a small grainy picture, the same smile from the photograph. I cross-referenced the name with public records. I found an Eliza Winters, who had married a man named Robert Miller in 1970. And then he said her name. I found an obituary for a Robert Miller from 2005, and then I found her current address. She lived only 3 hours away in a town called Cedar Brook. I called an old friend of his, David. They'd been roommates in college. I pretended I was helping with a reunion directory, checking old addresses. I mentioned Eliza Winters, casually asking if David remembered her. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Eliza, yeah. I remember her. Wow, that's a name from the past. She and your husband, they were inseparable for a while. Serious stuff. We all thought he was going to propose. My throat went dry. What happened? I asked, trying to keep my voice light. I don't know. David said it just ended. He met you pretty soon after, didn't he? He never really talked about it again. It was like he just closed that book. A parallel life, the life he would have had if things had been different, the life he apparently still thought about, still mourned 40 years later. I felt like I was living in the shadow of a ghost. Every memory I had, our engagement, the birth of our children, our anniversaries. Was there a part of him that was always thinking of her? Was I just the consolation prize, the practical choice? The questions ate away at me. The uncertainty was a constant low hum of anxiety. I had to know the full truth. I had to know if it was a young man's lost love or something. I drove to Cedar Brook. It was a pretty quiet town with a main street lined with old trees. I didn't know what I was going to do. I just needed to see. I parked across the street from the address. I had a small blue house with a well-tended garden. I sat there for an hour feeling like a fool, like a stalker. And then the front door opened. An older woman came out to get the mail. She had gray hair now. But the frame was the same. It was her, Eliza. She looked ordinary nice. She went back inside. And then about 10 minutes later, I saw a car pull into the driveway, a familiar car, my husband's car. He got out carrying a bag of groceries. He walked up to her front door, and she opened it smiling. She took the bag from him, and he leaned in and kissed her cheek. It wasn't a passionate kiss. It was familiar, domestic. It was the kiss of a man who had done it 1,000 times. I sat there, my hands gripping the steering wheel. This wasn't a memory. This wasn't a ghost. This was a current event, an ongoing affair. The scale of it was staggering. How long, how many grocery runs, how many afternoons in that blue house? Well, I thought he was at the office, or playing golf. I didn't confront him. Then I drove home in a daze. The truth was worse than I had imagined. It wasn't just a nostalgic regret. It was an active second life. I waited. Until he came home that evening smelling of the outside air. How was your day? I asked. Fine. He said, just ran some errands. I looked at him. This man I had shared a bed with for 4 decades. And I saw a complete stranger, a brilliant liar. I know about Eliza. I said. His face went pale. I know you were at her house today. The denials. It wasn't my name. Started, but they were weak. He could see I had the facts. And then the story came tumbling out. They had reconnected 15 years ago at a class reunion. It had started as friendship, a chance to talk about the old days. And it had turned into this, a quiet parallel relationship. He claimed he never meant to hurt me. He claimed he loved us both, that he couldn't choose. Hearing the confession was like finally reading the last page of a mystery novel, only to discover the villain had been living in your house. The whole time the life we built wasn't just partially a lie. It was a carefully constructed stage set. And he had been playing a part for 15 years. I thought about the family vacations, the Christmases, the times he held my hand in the hospital. Were any of those moments real for him? Or was he just going through the motions, counting the hours, until he could see her? The emotional impact was a physical weight on my chest. The uncertainty was gone, replaced by a cold, hard certainty that was somehow more painful. We are in therapy now. It feels like a strange clinical dance. He says he wants to save our marriage. He says he'll end it with her. But the words mean nothing. How can you believe a promise from a man who has lied to you every day for 15 years? The therapist talks about rebuilding trust. But trust isn't a vase you can glue back together. It's more like a sheet of glass. Once it's shattered, you can still see through it. But the cracks are always there, distorting everything. So now I live with this new reality. I look at our wedding photos. And I don't see a happy beginning. I see the beginning of a deception. Even if he didn't know it, then I look at our children. And I wonder what they've inherited from this double life. The decision point is here every single day. Do I stay? Do I go? It's not a simple question of betrayal anymore. It's a question of identity. If the story of my life, of our life together, is a fiction, then who am I? Was I ever truly loved, or was I just a convenient character in his narrative? The future is a blank page. And it's terrifying. I am no longer the victim of that shocking moment at the retirement party. That woman is gone. I am now the author of whatever comes next. And the first sentence is the hardest one to write. The retirement party was supposed to be a celebration. 40 years at the same firm. The gold watch, the speeches, the cake. I stood by his side, smiling, my hand on his arm. Id practiced that smile in the mirror. It had to look genuine. Then he stepped up to the microphone. He thanked his colleagues, his clients. And then he said her name, not mine, he said. And I couldn't have done it without the unwavering support of the true love of my life, Alina. A silence fell over the room. It was just a second, but it was so loud everyone knew my name is Carol. Alina was someone from 60 years ago. A college sweetheart. A story he told me once, early on, a fond memory. Not this, not a declaration like that in front of everyone we knew. The ride home was absolute silence. The air in the car was so thick with it, you could barely breathe. I stared out the window at the passing streetlights. Each one a blur. The rage was a physical thing. It was a hot, tight coil in my chest. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw things. I wanted to hurt him as deeply as he had hurt me. I played out scenarios in my head, packing my bags, calling a lawyer, telling the children, watching their world shatter. The desire for retribution was like a thirst. It was all-consuming. But after a few days, the rage began to hollow me out. It left me empty. I'd lie in bed. And the anger would be replaced by this profound despair, a feeling of my entire life, my entire marriage being a lie. I felt like a fool. I had built my home on a foundation I didn't even know was sand. And the weight of that bitterness, that hatred, was so heavy it was exhausting. It was all I could think about. It was poisoning my mornings, my nights, every quiet moment. It was a name I knew. Sarah from accounting. I'd met her at a dozen office Christmas parties. A quiet woman, pleasant, always with a book in her hand. He said her name with a tenderness that felt like a physical blow. The air left my lungs. The room didn't just get quiet, it became a vacuum, a silent, airless void. And then one morning, I was making coffee. I looked at my reflection in the chrome of the kettle. I looked tired, I looked old. And I had a thought so clear, it was like a voice speaking to me. This anger, who is it hurting? He seemed to be sleeping just fine. He went about his days with a quiet shame. But he was functioning. I was the one not sleeping. I was the one with the constant knot in my stomach. I was the one who couldn't enjoy a sunset or a good book, because this pain was always there, buzzing in the background. The anger wasn't a weapon against him. It was a poison I was drinking myself, hoping he would die from it. That was the pivotal moment, the choice. I could continue down this path of destruction, which would only end with me a bitter, broken woman. Or I could choose something else, something infinitely harder. I chose to forgive him, not for him, not to excuse what he did. But for me, I chose it for my own peace. It was the most selfish and the most necessary decision I have ever made. Understanding why was the next step. I couldn't just forgive a random cruel act. I had to try to understand it, even if I never could fully. Was it a moment of senility? The doctor said no. His mind was sharp. Was it a deliberate cruel act meant to humiliate me, that didn't fit the man I'd lived with for 4 to 5 years? He was deeply ashamed, apologizing constantly. But his apologies felt inadequate. They skimmed the surface. We needed to go deeper. We started therapy reluctantly at first. Sitting in that office felt like a confession of failure. But it created a safe space, a container for all the pain. We started to unpack things I didn't even know were still in the attic of our marriage, the slow drifting apart. After the kids left, the conversations we never had, the quiet compromises that had built up a wall between us. And slowly, haltingly, he began to talk about Alina not as a romantic rival, but as a symbol. She represented a path. Not taken. He had loved her, but it was a young love, an impractical love. He'd chosen a different life, a responsible life with me. What I began to see was that his declaration wasn't really about her. It wasn't even about me. It was about him. It was a moment of profound regret, a grief for the boy he once was, for the reckless, passionate choice he didn't make at the peak of his career celebration. Facing the finality of retirement, he looked back and saw the ghost of that other life. And in a terrible public moment of weakness, he gave that ghost a voice. It was a betrayal, yes, a deep one, but understanding that it sprang from his own long-held sorrow, a grief he had never processed, made it human. It didn't excuse it. Nothing could excuse the humiliation he caused me. But it allowed me to separate the action from the man. I could hate the betrayal with every fiber of my being. But I didn't have to hate the frail, regretful man who committed it. That separation was everything. The real work, the hard work, came after the understanding. Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip, it's a daily practice. It's a choice you make over and over again. A memory would surface, the look on Sarah's face, from accounting the way the room went quiet, and the pain would wash over me again, fresh and sharp. The old anger would rise up. And in those moments, I had to practice. I had to acknowledge the thought, feel the pain, and then consciously let it go. I would literally say to myself, I feel that pain and I choose to release it. It does not get to live here anymore. It felt silly at first, but it built a muscle, the muscle of letting go. Rebuilding trust was a different matter entirely. Forgiveness didn't mean instant restoration. It didn't mean things went back to normal. How could they? We had to establish new rules. We had to learn a new way of being together. We had dates, awkward, quiet dinners, where we practiced talking about things that weren't the weather. We had to be painfully, deliberately kind to each other. The trust wasn't a given anymore. It was something we had to earn brick by brick. And it was slow. Some days it felt impossible. For a second, nothing happened. There was just the ringing in my ears, then a slow, sickening turn of my head. I had to find her. I had to see her face. And there, she was across the room. She wasn't looking at him with surprise or embarrassment. She was looking at him with a quiet, profound understanding. A small, sad smile touched her lips. It was a look that spoke of years, years of secrets, of private jokes, of a shared life. I knew nothing about that look. Confirmed everything in an instant. This was not a slip of the. I also found I couldn't do it alone. I had to be vulnerable. I shared my story with my sister, with one close friend, not to gossip, not to vilify him, but to say, I am going through this, and I need your support. Saying the words out loud, I have chosen to forgive my husband for a deep betrayal, was terrifying. But the support I received, the lack of judgment, gave me strength. It made the journey feel less lonely. And through this process, I discovered a strange thing. I found a new kind of strength, a resilience. Didn't know I had. The pain didn't disappear, but it lost its power over me. I started to care for myself better. I started to remember who I was outside of being his wife. That's what they call post-traumatic growth. I grew through the pain. I found a self-love that was entirely my own. And that led me to a new definition of love. The love I had for him, for most of our marriage, was based on a certain ideal. It was the romantic love of storybooks. This experience burned that ideal to the ground. What emerged from the ashes was something different, something more complex, more real. It's a love that has seen the worst and is still choosing to stay. It's a love that understands fragility and regret. It's a love that is less about passion and more about a deep, quiet commitment. it's a conscious choice, not a feeling that carries you away. The peace that came with this new understanding was profound. It was a release. It was like setting down a suitcase I'd been carrying for miles, not realizing how heavy it was. The burden of bitterness was gone. I could breathe again. I could laugh without it feeling like a betrayal of my own pain. My identity shifted. I was no longer the wronged wife that had been my entire identity. For months I became a survivor. And then eventually, I just became me again, Carol, a woman who had been through a fire and had come out the other side scarred but whole. Forgiveness, I learned, is not something you do for the person who wronged you. It's not absolution. It doesn't mean what happened was okay. It's a gift you give yourself. It's the active decision to stop letting the past dictate your present. It's claiming your own freedom. He called her the love of his life that night, but my choice to forgive him, that was the act that truly defined my life. It gave me back to myself. And that, I've come to understand, is the only love story that really matters in the end. The air in the banquet hall was thick with the smell of roasted chicken and old perfume. I was just another face in the crowd, tucked away at a table near the back. I'd chosen this spot specifically, a quiet corner where I could observe without being seen. It felt safer that way. The clatter of cutlery, the low hum of 100 conversations, the occasional burst of forced laughter. It was all just background noise to my own private anxiety. I watched him at the head table. Robert, my Robert. He looked so comfortable up there, basking in the glow of a 40-year career. He was giving his speech. And I allowed myself a small secret smile. He was always so good with words. He was talking about his journey, thanking the people who shaped him, mentors, old friends. It was all very gracious, very proper. Then his voice shifted. It got quieter, more personal. He started talking about gratitude of a different kind, about connections that sustain you in ways you never expect. My heart started to beat a little faster. I took a sip of water, my hand not quite steady. I tried to catch his eye, to send him a silent warning. But he wasn't looking at me. He was looking out at the sea of faces. But his gaze was distant, like he was seeing a different time.